Media is a great way to enhance your content. WordPress fully supports all kinds of media, from images to videos to audio files. You can view all the media you have uploaded on the Media page in the WordPress admin dashboard. You may see some images here already. These were provided by FakerPress when we ran it. We're going to create a block that will allow the user to select an image from the media uploader and render it on the page. WordPress already provides this feature, but you may end up having to create your own version later down the road. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a zip file that contains everything you'll need. Download it and unzip the contents into the app directory. You'll be provided a folder called Media Upload Block. Inside this folder should be two files, an index.js file and editor.scss file. The editor file will contain some stylings to position a remove button. We will give our users the choice to remove an image they select. The index file contains the usual. We're destructuring some components and registering the block. To get started, we'll need to destructure a couple more components. From the wp.editor object, destructure the media upload and media upload check components. From the wp.components object, destructure the dash icon object. The media upload component will generate the UI for selecting and uploading images to the media uploader. The media upload check component does something different than any other component we've encountered so far. It was specifically made to check to see if the user currently logged in has the correct permissions to upload and manage files. This component must be wrapped around the media upload component. You'll see how that's done soon enough. The dash icon component allows you to use the dash icon set anywhere in your block. Previously, we used the name to display an icon, but that's because WordPress took the time to render this component for you. If we want to use a dash icon in a custom location, then we'll need to be the ones to render the icon. It's super simple, so don't worry. With the components destructured, let's set some attributes. The attribute we're going to create will revolve around what the media uploader returns. Will be returned an ID, URL, and alternative text. Let's start with the ID. The name will be image ID. The type will be number. The ID will be the ID of the media item which is stored in the database. We won't be using it, but it's still something you may need later down the road. I'm also not going to store it in the element. Instead, I'll just store it in the comments. Next is the image URL. The type will be string and the source will be attribute. We're essentially telling WordPress that the value can be found inside an attribute when it's loading the HTML from the database. If you set the source to attribute, then you'll need to set the attribute property next. This will allow you to specify the attribute the value is stored in. Set this to source. We'll be using an image tag. It would make sense that the URL would be stored there. Lastly, define the selector property and set it to image. I'm going to make a copy of this as the alternative text will be the same thing except the attribute will be alt. Alright, the attributes are ready. The next step is to set up the UI. The UI will require a bit of work to set up, so prepare yourself. First, we're going to need to return some JSX. Then, we'll need to display a button that will render the media uploader. Here's the problem though. We only want to display the button if there is no media currently being displayed. We'll want to use a conditional statement for this, but we can't use traditional conditional statements in JSX. Instead, we'll have to use a ternary operator. For the condition, I'm going to check if the props.attributes.imageID is set. If it is, then we'll display the image. Otherwise, we'll display the button for the media uploader. We'll start with the media uploader. Output the media upload check and media upload components. I'm wrapping the media upload component inside the media upload check component. This is required if you want to limit who can and who can't upload images. You're not required to pass in any special attributes to the media upload check component. It's already properly configured for you. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to this component's documentation. This page will provide an example on how to use this component and its attributes. Feel free to read up on it after you finish this lecture. Back inside the script, the first attribute we'll define is allowed types. This should be set to an array of file types you'd like to allow. We only want to allow one type of file, which is image. This is optional, but if you set it, WordPress will limit what media file type a user can select. We only want to allow users to select images. Next, we'll need to set the value attribute. Set this to props.attributes.imageID. If you pass in a value, then WordPress will automatically select the media item with the same ID. This way, the user doesn't have to scroll around to find the media item they selected previously. The next attribute is onSelect. Set this to selectImage. This is an event that will be triggered when the user selects an image. The value for this attribute should be a function that will process the image. We're passing in a named function that currently isn't defined. We'll define it in just a moment, but let's keep moving forward. Lastly, we'll need to set the render attribute. This attribute is used to render the button that will open the media uploader. The media upload component will not display the media uploader immediately. Instead, it gets rendered when a certain function is called. The media upload component gives us the opportunity to create that button ourselves. The value for this attribute will be an anonymous function that will be passed in an object. We only care about one property from this object, and that's the open function. I'll destructure that. The open function will open the media uploader. We'll call this in a moment, but let's create a button using the button component. I'm applying the button and button-large classes. The text inside will be upload image. Now let's set the onClick event to the open function. Here's what's going to happen. The media upload component will display the button we created in the render attribute. The button will call the open function when the click event is triggered. The open function will take care of displaying the media uploader when called. Before we begin displaying the image after it's been selected, we'll need to store the image data. For the onSelect attribute, we're calling the selectImage function. Let's define that above. The function will be passed in an object called image. This object will contain the properties and values related to the image selected from the media uploader. Using this object, I'm going to set each attribute to their respective property. To do this, I'm calling the setAttributes function. In a previous lecture, we would only set one value, but it is possible to set multiple values like I'm doing here. The ID of the image is stored in the ID property, the image URL is stored in the URL property, and the alternative text is stored in the alt property. I was able to find out the names by simply logging the object and reviewing it in the console. I recommend you try logging the object yourself. This will give you a better idea of what properties are inside the object. The next step is to display the image. Back inside the return statement, I'm going to add the code to the section that will run if the condition is true, which is checking if there is an image ID. I'm going to wrap everything with a div tag. The tag should have the class image container. I'm adding this because we're going to have a button with absolute positioning. In order to have elements with absolute positioning, we need a tag with relative positioning, which is what this class does. From here, I'm going to add the image tag with the source and alt attributes. I'll set them to their respective attribute values. Lastly, we need to add the button that will remove the image if the user clicks on it. We're going to use another ternary operator for this. We only want to display the button if the block is currently selected. This is a user experience design decision. If the user is editing the block, then it makes sense to display options related to editing the block. However, if the block isn't selected, then we want to hide the options to prevent adding clutter to the interface. Once again, this step is optional, but I think it makes sense here. We're going to check if the props.isSelected property is set to true. Remember, this is a property WordPress will automatically update for you if the block is being edited. If this returns true, then we'll display the button component. I'm applying the class buttonRemove and setting the onClick event to remove image. This function doesn't exist, but we'll be adding it soon enough. For the content inside, I'm going to add the -icon component. You have the option of adding in your own custom SVG icon, but I think a dash icon will suffice here. You can use any of the dash icons provided by WordPress. All you need to do is add the icon attribute and pass in the name of the icon you'd like to use. You don't have to add the -icon prefix as it's added for you. The icon we're going to use is the no icon, which is an X mark. I'm also going to set the size attribute to 20. This is measured in pixels. That should display the button. It has absolute positioning. Check out the editor file for the CSS code. To finish things off, we'll need to set the second half of the ternary operator to null, which will display nothing if the block isn't selected. The last step is to create the remove image function we specified for the onClick event. I'll create it above. It will be the same thing as before, except I'll set all attributes to null like so. Alright, let's recap what this function will do. Let's assume the block was added for the first time. The first thing that will happen is this condition check. It will check if there is a value for image ID. By default, it should be null. Since that's the case, the second half of this code will run. The media upload component will be rendered. The media upload component will display whatever is in the render property. The render property will display a button that will run the open function when it's clicked. The open function was provided to us by the component, so we don't have to do anything else. The media library modal will open and allow the user to select or upload an image. If an image is selected, then the function inside the onSelect function will run. Scrolling up, all we're doing here is using the image object and setting the attributes to their respective values. This will cause the block to re-render again. This time, since the image ID attribute has a value, the code inside the first half will render. This will render the image the user selected. This will also display a button that will allow them to remove the image if the block is active. If they click the button, then the remove image function will run. This will set all the attributes to null. That's basically it. The save function will display the image. Use the image tag and set the source and alt attributes to their respective values. Save your changes and import this block from the app/index.js file. Then cd into the blocks directory and run the npm run dev command. Lastly, try creating a new recipe post and add this block to your content. Initially, you should see a button. If you click it, then a modal should appear. This is the media library. You can select any image and then press select. The button should disappear and instead the image should appear in its place. There's also the option of removing the button. If I were to deselect the block, then the remove button should go away. If I were to select the block again, then it will reappear. Clicking on this should remove the image. I'm going to add the image back in and save the post. Viewing the post on the front end should just display the image. We're finished. We know how to add the media uploader to our blocks. Feel free to play around with this.